Once upon a time, my husband David was a high school science teacher. We had both just graduated from college. We didn't have kids yet, so we just packed up, moved to Colorado, and he became the department chair at a school for at-risk youth. Um, Part of that meant cleaning up the lab, which hadn't been used for a while. So he dusted everything off, restocked the lab, got all excited to introduce the kids to it. But first, he had to teach them about lab safety. So he decided to do a demonstration in the classroom. Welcome to the Family Lab podcast, where we investigate all things parenting and home management. I thought today's episode would be a great time to really introduce the premise of the Family Lab and give an overview of what it's all about. So I broke it down into 10 basic philosophies that kind of sum up my approach to both the podcast and parenting in general. And I'm going to start with the most obvious philosophy. Our homes are laboratories, not museums, not movie sets, not masterpieces. They're working laboratories with all the mess, all the explosions, like what my husband experienced in that intro. It's a messy business running a family and running a home. Our families are the teams of scientists working in these labs, experimenting, failing, succeeding, creating, and exploring together. Our homes and the people in them are works in progress, and we're constantly trying new things. This all seems so obvious to me now, but it did take a while for me to come to this conclusion. When I was a young mom, I just thought there was one right answer to all these systems, like meal planning, laundry, getting babies to sleep, nap schedules, picking up toys, organizing the house, all of these things. I thought if I researched enough, talked to enough people, I would find the perfect solutions that would just put my life on autopilot so that I could then do the things I wanted to and work on relationships and all those things. I could just find the right system for me and my family, and then everything would go smoothly. So I did a lot of research. I read, I wrote up systems. I really tried to follow them. And what I realized is that life changes, our circumstances change, the number of people in our house changes. There is no one system that's going to sail us through all of our family existence. Everything about families are messy, including the people in them. And as soon as I realized this, it gave me so much freedom and it made it so much more fun because experimenting, even if it's frustrating sometimes. I'm guessing that like mine, your house is not a well-oiled machine or a sterile factory. It is a living, breathing laboratory, complete with petri dishes, little guinea pigs running around, maybe even the occasional explosion. As the head scientist in your lab, you're learning and growing just as much as those guinea pigs are. And that is why I renamed my podcast The Family Lab. And that's really the premise of this podcast. It's basically a collaboration between scientists. We all do our own experiments in our own little labs and come together to share what works, what didn't, learn from each other's failures, just get some ideas for those times when we don't know what the heck we're doing, and really just to form a community where we can discuss what's going on in our labs. On that note, I've been trying to figure out how to make this more of a real life community, since mostly I'm just talking at you listeners and I don't even know who's listening. I would really love to figure out how to gather as a community more often. So I'm just going to start kind of in a little way. On Wednesdays at 10 o'clock Mountain Time, I'm going to just have an open studio where we can talk about some of the upcoming episodes. We can meet each other, talk about what we're struggling with, what we're working on, the experiments we're trying, and I don't know, just get to know each other. So whether or not people show up, I'm going to show up on Wednesdays at 10 through the month of April. Just as an experiment. I have to put my money where my mouth is and do experiments. So we're going to do that. We're going to try it. So this Wednesday, February 19th, just the day after this episode comes out. So I don't know how many people will hear it in time, but we'll be discussing how to figure out what our parenting superpowers are and how to kind of lean into those and develop those, maybe discover something new. That'll be that first discussion. The next week on February 26th, we'll be talking about how to have successful family movie nights. So, how to find movies that fit with all our kids' ages, make it a fun event. But also, we'll share our top 5 family movies because that'll be our next top 5 episode. So, hope you can join us, and I'll keep updating on Instagram and on my podcast episodes what the different topics will be for the different weeks. Hope to see you there. So the second philosophy that I want to talk about is the idea that motherhood and fatherhood are relationships and that they don't describe the work that we often associate with them, like caregiving and home management. So you can outsource caregiving, you can outsource home management. You can't outsource your relationship with your kids. And that's an important distinction because we often muddy the water and then it gets confused with like gender stereotypes and things like that. But if you really look at like your main job as a parent is to build this relationship with your child, then you can figure the other stuff out. There are a couple of different women who've helped me realize this. One is Hannah Olson, who has a whole platform where she just talks about this, how motherhood is a relationship. And then my friend Rebecca Brown Wright, who wrote this awesome article about how motherhood is not housework, and those two should not be synonymous. So the reason that this makes a difference is just in the way you approach it. Relationships come first, all the other things come second. And it really does make a big difference, even for me with morale. Like I can still be a good mom and have a messy house, or if I'm not completely organized or don't do all the other stuff, being a good mom is that you have a relationship and that you're working on that with your children, and that is the big priority. Especially when I first decided to stay at home with my kids and quit my job, I struggled with those doctor forms that wanted you to list your occupation, and I'd be like, do I put mom? Do I put homemaker? Do I put, what do I put there? And it used to bother me. I did a whole episode called The Job with No Name. And I really struggled with this, but I've kind of just settled on like, yeah, motherhood is a relationship. It's not the job. The job itself is caregiving and home management, and that's what I was doing full time. And yeah, that is a full-time job. Even if you have another full-time or part-time job, caregiving and home management or managing whatever you outsource in those is also a full-time job. So anyway, compartmentalizing it like that has really helped me. So that's kind of one of my philosophies. So the third underlying philosophy is strategy first. And let me explain kind of what I mean by that. So before I had kids, I was a magazine editor, and it was a marketing magazine. So for every case study, I would first think about, okay, what is their strategy? What are the goals they're trying to accomplish? Why are they doing it? What are their values? So that's the first thing to think about. Then second is tactics. It's kind of what they're doing, what the system is, kind of their approach to carrying out that strategy. And then the third is logistics, and that's details, how execution, it's how they're going to do it. So that is just kind of the mindset I had. And so one day I realized, oh, I can apply that same idea to things that I do in my home, especially the systems that I create. So I'll take laundry as an example because it's kind of a simple self-contained system in our house. So often we start with logistics when we're thinking about laundry. We're like, okay, I've got these piles. I have to sort them. All the nitty gritty, like get them back in the drawers. Just the details of laundry. But I decided to take a step back and think, okay, what is my strategy for laundry? What is the goal here? What do I want to accomplish? And obviously, one of the goals is that you have to get clean clothes, that people can have something to wear, But on a bigger picture, I decided I wanted laundry to be a way for my kids to learn how to take care of themselves. It's a pretty easy task overall that they could use to help become self-sufficient, understand that they're responsible for their own mess, kind of thing. So that is a very different strategy than if you're like, hey, I want their clothes to last long and not be stained and just be done all the time. And, I just want this to be an easy thing. That is a perfectly great strategy. If you want efficiency, for example, to be your main strategy for laundry and just like what is the most efficient way to get dirty clothes from the hamper to their drawers. That is a very great strategy for laundry. There is no right or wrong strategy. You just have to figure out what is important to you. Like for some people, that might be their biggest nightmare to have their kids help with laundry when they could just get it done so fast. So I chose my strategy, and then I chose the tactics for that. We got each kid in an individual laundry basket, so they don't mix them up, so we don't have to sort. I have a whole system. There's an episode about it. I'll link that as well. But only then did I think about logistics. Okay, so who does it what day, and how do I check and make sure it gets done, and all those things. So I kind of apply this to any system in my house, from finances to housework to even teaching my kids how to take care of themselves, like brushing teeth and hygiene and things like that. I always kind of think of an overall strategy, what we're trying to accomplish, and then I go down to logistics. And that has been a great way for me to think about life so that we stay focused on our values, and everything kind of goes back to that. And I'm going to do a full episode on that idea soon, just, how we can kind of start with that strategy. The fourth philosophy that I want to talk about is just prioritizing and essentializing. I read the book Essentialism, several years ago, and then reread it right before my accident, which was great timing. And then I actually even got to interview the author of it, so hopefully we'll have him on the podcast at some point too. Anyway, it's a great book. It's just kind of a spin on minimalism, really, like pare down your life to the essentials, but it's okay if that doesn't always look like minimalism. You can be really extra about the things that you care about. So it's more like just figuring out what you care about and then making sure that your life really reflects that and the way you set that up. So this kind of ties in with that strategic emphasis that I was talking about before, but it really just is a great way to think about your priorities, what's important to you. Again, like that whole idea of people over things, relationships first, and just the idea of really sitting down with your family and figuring out what's important to you. I'll do an episode on that too, so I won't go too far into that, but that's another big theme for the podcast. So the fifth big philosophy is that there is no one right way to mom. I mean, that goes with the experiments, all that stuff too, but I just love this idea that we all have our strengths, we all have our superpowers, and we can lean into those and let the other stuff go. Either find somebody else to provide that service for your family that you're weak in, or just let it go. I, again, used to think that I could master all the skills that were important to run a house and be a good parent. And it's just not realistic, and it's not ideal, actually. Nobody even wants a perfect parent. That would be way too much pressure if your mom or dad was perfect. But also, if you try to be good at everything, you might end up being good at nothing. So I just love the idea of all of us parents figuring out what our strengths are, really feeding those strengths and getting really great at those, and then figuring out how to pick up the slack in the other areas. So I've already recorded a great episode about that. I had such a great discussion with my friend Maria Eckersley, and it's a treat. So look forward to that one. Number 6 is to build your village. This piggybacks on what I was just talking about, where we all have our strengths. Make your village a place where you can compensate for your weaknesses and find people who can fill in the gaps that you have. But really, I think the most important thing with building a village is to start by just being the villager you want to find. Be that for other people, serve other people, offer to watch people's kids, offer to bring meals when somebody's just had a baby. Be the villager that you hope you can find. I've lived a lot of places, and I've found this to be true everywhere I've lived. And even places where I lived for just a year, I've been able to form a village, even if it was small. Just other moms that I could rely on and that I could help, and just formed these little communities. But it really does start with us, and you have to put in the work, and it is always worth it. We are so much stronger together. Plus, it's just more fun that way. So, um, the seventh philosophy I wanted to talk about was to study our children like we're anthropologists, like we're Jane Goodall studying the chimps or studying some other culture in a remote village or something. These unique children of ours are interesting and diverse and confusing and baffling. And it is really funny to kind of step back and just think about, like, okay, what if I never met this person? What would I think? One thing I always think about when I think about this idea is this article written by Susan Orlean, one of my favorite writers, way back in 1992. So I was 13, I guess, but she wrote about this boy. It's called The American Man, Age 10. And she basically just follows this 10-year-old boy in his daily activities, going to the arcade, going to school, at home, playing in the backyard, hanging out with his friends. She just like takes him seriously as a source and does this investigative reporting and writes this profile about this 10-year-old boy. And 10-year-old boys are 10-year-old boys. And even though this was in the early 90s, it is a great read, and it is still very, very much rings true to 10-year-old boys today, obviously. It is just a delight to read. I think of that when I'm with my kids, and I think, okay, what would an investigative reporter be noting right here? And it helps me to approach them with curiosity and wonder, instead of just like, oh, they're doing that again. Like, oh, that is a repeated behavior. That is so interesting. I wonder why they keep doing that. I wonder how we could, disrupt that cycle, or what we could do. If you kind of just take that step back and remove yourself and look at them that way, it is a really interesting exercise. Anyway, I will link that. You just have to sign up for a free account at Esquire to be able to read that. It is just a delightful piece. So I highly recommend that. Anyway, try it for a day. Study your kids like an anthropologist. Make notes of what they're doing. Do a field study. Pull out your binoculars, whatever you need to do. It's kind of a fun exercise. The eighth philosophy I want to talk about is sharing the workload as a family team. So this topic is going to launch me into a rant because this is one of my pet peeves right now. I feel like we're throwing around the term default parent a lot, as in, I'm tired of being the default parent. Everything falls on me, the invisible load, all of that thing, which that is all valid. Like, the invisible load is a real thing, and it should be acknowledged, and we should make the invisible load visible. I'm a true believer in that. Like, we should, talk about all those management level tasks that are on our brains. But just the whole idea of somebody being the default parent is such a cop-out for communication. Yes, all of those things have to be decided, and somebody has to do the invisible work and carry the mental load. All of that is true, but it should be something that is communicated and spoken, not just defaulted, and not to accept that, okay, I'm the default parent. So the real antidote to default parenting is just communication, figuring out what all that invisible work is, making it visible by writing it down, or at least having a conversation about it, and dividing it up. Figuring out who's best at what, and dividing those skills. Sometimes it'll be sharing the load. Sometimes it'll just be dividing and conquering. But ideally, there are no defaults. There isn't, somebody who all the work falls on in an unspoken way. It should be out in the open, and we should show gratitude to each other for the things that we carry. And that includes spouses, whoever is sharing the caregiving and home management. So that includes children that have specific jobs, but everybody should know what the expectations are. And Yeah, I have a whole system for that also. I have done the work in writing out all those tasks, at least, the main departments, and then acknowledging who's in charge of managing each department in your household. There are 2 episodes that talk about this. I'll link those in the show notes as well. And I made some worksheets that kind of list all the work involved in running a home and caring for the people in it. And you can just kind of talk through it if that helps you. Um, anyway, that's kind of one of the foundational philosophies of this podcast as well. As you can tell, I'm a little bit passionate about it. Down with defaults, talk it through, figure out who's in charge of things. And that brings us to philosophy number 9, that we are in the business of raising managers. As parents, we're trying to get kids to the point where they can manage their own lives. And we can do that in this little lab that we have, just teaching them how to become responsible for themselves. So the way I think about this is that kids start off as helpers, and then they become workers, and then they become managers, kind of like an apprenticeship system. So, from a very young age, they help us take care of them. In the bathtub, they're helping learn how to scrub their hair and use the soap, or, they're helping clean their room, clean up their toys when they're really little. Then we kind of give them the skills. We help develop the skills that way. Then they become workers where they're doing the work, and maybe we're assisting them and we're supervising them, we're managing them, we're making sure it gets done. We're hopefully not micromanaging, but just teaching them the skills that they need to do the work. And then eventually they can graduate and become managers where they're carrying the mental load for each of those tasks. They're remembering that, oh, I need to shower. It's been 2 days, or whatever your schedule is. Where they own the tasks and they are carrying the mental load. They're doing the invisible work. And then that's off your plate. You don't micromanage once you've taught them to be a manager. They own that task. They're responsible for it. They have that skill set and they're self-sufficient in that area. So the idea is we just build more and more and more of those until they're confident and responsible citizens. There's obviously, their different strengths and weaknesses play into this, but even little kids can become the manager over getting dressed or something like that. And then that just builds that confidence, that skill, and then they can carry that into other tasks and learn it, different abilities, different neurodivergence. There's always something that you can put them in charge of, to be in charge of for themselves, no matter how small. And that will, help to develop that skill. It builds confidence and competence. It's a great thing. And now we've made it to number 10, the last philosophy that I'm going to talk about today. And that is flexibility trumps consistency. I used to think it was the other way around. I kept reading in these books that the most important thing about parenting was consistency, like, following through and which obviously is important to follow through, but, keeping your rules consistent, keeping your routines consistent, just consistency. And I was terrible at consistency because I was dealing with these very inconsistent creatures that are children. And I just felt like a failure all the time because I was going for this goal of consistency. And I soon realized that consistency does not necessarily work, especially if you have multiple children, because they are not the same. They don't need the same rules. When I was growing up, we used to go to the Pomona County Fair in California. And so whenever we would complain about things not being fair, my mom would say, if you want fair, go to Pomona. And so I still say that even though my kids have no idea what Pomona is. But life is rarely fair. It's not a guiding principle in the way I parent because different kids need different things. My approach is going to be different for each kid based on what they need. And that flexibility has been much more valuable and much more effective than any efforts at consistency have. You just have to be able to go with the flow. You basically just have to expect that things will not go according to plan and just train yourself to value flexibility over consistency. That is the advice that I wish I could go back and give that younger self and stop beating myself up over not being this perfectly consistent robot parent. I now see flexibility as my greatest asset as a parent, and it serves me well every day of my life as a parent and in life and in general. So those are some of the guiding principles that I live by. It wasn't easy to boil down my philosophies into 10 principles, and I'm sure they'll shift and change as we go, and I'll learn more things and add to them. But there you have it. That's the best I can do at summarizing some of my parenting philosophies right now. And I can't wait to keep learning and growing together, adding to these philosophies, and just sharing our parenting journeys together. Thank you for listening to the Family Lab podcast. I mentioned a lot of other episodes in this episode, so those will all be in the show notes. And I want to give a special thanks to my assistant producer, Bailey Blake, for all of her hard work. And I also want to give a special thanks to my mother, Susan Singley, for playing the theme music for this podcast. She used to play this song all the time when I was a kid, and to me, it's the soundtrack of motherhood.